So referencing and plagiarism. In this video we're going to cover why referencing is necessary in academic work, what plagiarism is and what the consequences of plagiarism are, what referencing actually is, and how exactly you use referencing in your work. So why is referencing necessary in academic work? Well, first and foremost, it's to prove that what you have stated in your writing is accurate. If we didn't have references to back up statements and facts and figures, it'd be very difficult to distinguish between what's true and what's false. Secondly, it's to avoid plagiarism. Now, we'll talk about plagiarism a bit more in the next slide, but essentially what plagiarism is submitting a piece of work, claiming it as your own, when in fact it's somebody else's. It also shows the reader or assessor where you've got your information from, which allows them to consult and verify those resources. It proves to them that the sources you've used are good quality. Therefore, what you've stated is accurate. And at the same time, having a good list of references in your work demonstrates that you've undertaken a good breadth of research during the time you've spent on this piece of work. So what exactly is plagiarism then? Essentially, it's a form of academic misconduct. Essentially, it's cheating. It's very similar to cheating in an exam. What does it include exactly? Well, copy-pasting of text is a very classic form of plagiarism. You've taken a bit of text, you've copied it, you've pasted it into your own work, and then submitted it as your own, when it's clearly not even written by you. Now, a way around that would be to paraphrase it, or write it in your own words. But if you do that without referencing it, telling the reader where you got that information from, this is also plagiarism as well, because you haven't referenced the source of the information. So for example, if you were writing about a piece of research that someone had done, and you wrote it all in your own words, but didn't say where that piece of research has come from, it would suggest to the reader that you have done that piece of research yourself, which of course you haven't. You must acknowledge the thoughts and words of others when you're writing, and we do this through referencing. If you do not do it, it is considered plagiarism, because you're claiming that piece of work as your own. So if you do plagiarize something, what are the consequences of this? Well, the first thing to be very clear about is that any form of plagiarism at any institute is taken extremely seriously. It will not be overlooked and ignored. It will be taken extremely seriously. Most institutes implement a point system where the severity of the plagiarism will score a number of points, and where you find yourself on that scale will indicate the action that's taken. So these can range from a simple formal warning all the way through to having to resubmit work, and as far as being removed from the course and expelled from the institute. There are cases of this happening. It does happen. Modern systems are very good at checking any piece of work that's submitted against any available source that's out there. Everything is submitted digitally now, so this becomes very easy for us. Something to be very aware of: any other piece of work that's submitted by another student is also checked against. And this includes students from your year group, from the same institute, but also students from other institutes and other year groups. So please don't think that you can get around the modern system checks for plagiarism by copying work from an older student or someone from a different institute. So what exactly is referencing then? What does it look like? Well, it comes in two parts really. Firstly, we have in-text citations. So when you state something, facts, figures, whatever, and it's come from a particular source, we need to indicate that that particular piece of information has come from a particular place. And we very simply do that by including the author's name and date. And we call this citing. Then at the end of the work, we need a full list of all the sources that have been used throughout the work. Because we've only put the author's name and date in the text, it doesn't give the reader the full information they need if they wanted to go and have a look at that source. So at the end of the work, we have the full list of references, which include, for example, if it's a book, it would include the name of the book, the publisher, etc., etc. So they can go and find that information. So there are a number of different styles of referencing out there, and each institute will have their own preferred style that you use. So be sure to check that before you start any writing. Broadly speaking though, there are two main groups. Firstly, there's the Harvard method, which uses the author and date within the in-text citations. As this example shows, there are a couple of different ways of using this, which I'll get into in a later slide. The other method is the Vancouver method, where the author and date system is replaced with a number system. The Vancouver method is usually seen in pieces of work which have a very large quantity of referencing in them, such as academic reviews. So as already mentioned, you must include a full list of references that you've used throughout the piece of work. Now be clear that this is different from a bibliography. A bibliography is a list of what you have read, but not necessarily used in the work. When using the Harvard system for your reference list, the references are presented in alphabetical order by author. With the Vancouver system, the references are presented in the order in which they appear throughout the work. So be very clear on the difference between these two systems here. Now you can use lecture notes as part of your writing, but if you do, make sure that you reference them. However, it would be better to use an independent source for that information, such as a book or a journal article. That's because the reader or assessor wasn't necessarily in the lecture, so it makes it very difficult for them to verify that particular source. Note that your reference list and the in-text citations are not included in your word count. This is because they are simply things that have to be there. So what should be included for each reference within your reference list? So firstly, who created the work? So the author. When it was published, so what year? The title of the work, and details of where the work can be found. So if we were to look at some examples, for books, you'd have the author, so their surname, the initials, the year, the title of the book. Note that this is in italics, the edition, if it's not the first edition, otherwise this is left blank, the place of publication, which is a town or city, not a country, and finally the publisher. So an example where there is one author of a book, we've got the name of the author here, the year it was produced, the name of the book, the third edition, the place of publication, and the publisher. If we have multiple authors, they are just listed as shown here. Note we don't use the term et al. Here, which means and others, we make sure that every other author is listed. Notice how both of these references follow this exact format. Really important that you use the exact formatting in your reference list. My advice would be to not try to write this by hand yourself. There's a fantastic system within Word which will do all of this for you and keep records of them and so on. If you'd like to learn how to use that, and I strongly recommend that you do, I have another video on just that subject. There's a link in the description below to that video. I've also put a link to a website which gives all the detail that you could possibly need on how to structure your references should you wish to do them by hand. So if we were to include a reference from a paper, then again we have to follow a certain format. Again, we have the author at the beginning, the year, the title of the article, followed by the full title of the journal. Note that this is what is in italics for this type of reference, not the title of the article. We then have the volume number, the issue or part number, and the page numbers. If your reference is available online, you can also include the URL here as well. An example where there is one author, you can see that it follows again this template above, and again here. If you want to include a website, again we have a slightly different format for that. So we have the source, the year, the title of the web document or web page, which this is the part that is in italics, the type of medium, the date of update if available, and where you accessed it from, so the URL site, and the date at which you accessed it. Because of course websites can be updated, so if someone were to go and check your site that you've included here, it may have changed since you last looked at it. So it's important to include the date which you accessed it. And here we have an example. So a complete reference list may look something like this. Note that it is not presented in bullet point format, it's just spaced between the references. And this is used at the Harvard referencing system, so the authors are listed alphabetically. So that's the reference list. With regards to in-text citations throughout the work, you must do this correctly as well, in the correct format. And you must use it when you are quoting something directly, paraphrasing as mentioned earlier, but it also must be present when you include images, charts, tables, graphs in your work. And that includes whether you have taken the information from a chart or image or table and presented it in your own way. The data within it is still not yours, so therefore it still needs to be cited. Don't be tempted to add extra citations throughout your work from things that you haven't actually read. It's quite common that students sometimes include a few extra citations to give the impression that they have done more reading than they have. Almost always, it's very clear that this is the case, just from the quality of your writing. So how do we cite things in text? So with the Harvard method, which is the most common, we have the author's surname, or the name of the organisation if it's, say, a website like the NHS. And we don't include the initials. That's only included in the reference list at the end. And we include the year of publication. Not the exact date, just the year. And all the other details that we would see in the reference list at the end are not included here. This is just to keep it as brief as possible. The one thing that you may need to include extra beyond the name of the author, surname of the author, and the year, the page numbers. So if there's something in particular, very specific that you're referring to, then you should include a page number as well. So direct quotes are where you copy word for word what someone else has already written and include a citation. In scientific writing, this is strongly discouraged. This is because it does not properly show your understanding of the subject. You've copied what someone else has said, and even though you have not plagiarized, you have not shown a good understanding. Much better to rewrite it in your own words and include that citation still. If you must use a direct quote, then include a page number. You normally see direct quotes in English literature when someone is discussing a particular piece of work, such as a play or a poem or a piece of writing. If they want to talk about a particular line within that piece of work, they need to quote it directly because they can't write it in their own words, because they're talking about how the writer has written that particular line. There is no need for this in scientific work. So when using the Harvard referencing system, there are a few different citation styles that you can use when you're writing. Firstly, there is the direct or author prominent method. This is where the author is mentioned by their surname and the date of their work is in brackets afterwards. In this second example, there is no clear author, so the name of the organisation has been used. The other method is the indirect method, or the information prominent method. So here we state something, and then in brackets we have not just the date but the name of the author as well. And the name of the author and the date are separated by a comma. Note that in all cases, the citation is included before the full stop. It is part of the sentence. It's important with in-text citations to keep it brief so that they do not take over the work and make it very confusing to read. So if there are 4 or more authors, we use the term et al., which means and others. So for example, if there were 4 authors for this particular piece of work, the main author would be named and then it would be et al. Again, we see this with the indirect method here. Note that all authors must appear within the full reference. You mustn't use the et al. Shorthand in the reference list. One thing to note is that when you reference a particular piece of work, it's important that you have read that actual piece of work. If a piece of work is mentioned in a piece of work that you have read, but you haven't read the specific bit of work that you're referring to, you need to make that clear, and you do this with secondary referencing. An example of which is here. So we mention Brown, which is the person we want to reference, and the year, and then we say where it was found. So cited in Bassett, so a different piece of work, from 1986 on page 142. So this is the direct form of a citation, and an indirect form would look like this. Note that secondary referencing should be avoided. This is because the later work may apply different meaning to the original work. When including tables in your work, if the information has come from elsewhere, of course this will need a citation too. The citation appears next to the title of the table, which for tables is always at the top. If you're going to present information from another source within your work, it's recommended to construct your own table using that information. And that is what's happened with this table, because it states here, adapted from. So if you take some information and make a new table with it, or graph, or any other figure, then you must include the adapted from, then the reference, which includes the page number. Here we have a graph that's been taken directly from the source, and we know that because it does not say adapted from down here, it just gives the reference including the page number. Note again, the citation appears after the title of the figure, which of course for figures appears under the image. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the other links that I've put in the description below, which should give you more detail on referencing format and how to use the referencing system in Word.